Hey everybody, welcome back. My name's Ross McLennan. I'm here going to take you through the CBD Assessor Masterclass. I'm the Assistant Manager for the Commercial Buildings Programs team in Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources. I'm here with Steve.
Good afternoon everybody, my name is Stephen Presic. I'm Assistant Manager with the Energy Efficiency Compliance section, looking after the CBD compliance for the CBD program. Thanks Ross.
So I'll go through a quick agenda. We're going to run through what the CBD program is, which is hopefully pretty easy for you guys. We'll run through exemptions and exceptions, what that means, give you some tips for better assessments. And then Steve will take you through our compliance process and also some feedback from auditors. So a reminder that you can ask questions in the box in your top right, and you can also download this presentation on the resources page on the top right. So what is the CBD program? Introduced in 2010, and it's enabled by the Building Energy Efficiency Disclosure Act. It started in 2010, and then from 2011, building energy efficiency certificates became mandatory as well. And the whole idea is to provide information to the market to allow buyers and sellers and people, purchasing office space, leasing office space, to make informed decisions. It's a similar idea to energy efficiency ratings on appliances you have. Same type of thing, it's just on your commercial buildings. So the key point for us is that the program only applies to buildings or spaces over 1,000 square metres. So if you're underneath that 1,000 square metre mark, it does not apply to you. So in terms of what requirements we have for the program, if you want to be advertising an office building or space in an office building that's over 1,000 square metres, you need to have a building energy efficiency certificate in place first. And so that includes your NABERS energy rating and your tenancy lighting assessment. When you're advertising the building, you need to show that NABERS energy rating on all advertisements. So that includes anything in print, anything online, billboards, anywhere where you're advertising the building, you need to have that NABERS energy rating shown. It has to be a similar font and a similar size to the rest of the advertisement. You can't hide it in micro font down the bottom. And you need to be providing that building energy efficiency certificate to anybody who's interested in your building. So in terms of how the CBD program approvals process works, everything revolves around the Building Energy Efficiency Disclosure Act. And that Act specifies who has the powers to make decisions for the program and who can approve applications. At the initial level, that means it's the Secretary of the department that runs the program, so Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources, although with the new government we'll be changing departments fairly soon. So the Act specifies that the Secretary of the department has the power to approve applications, approve assessors, and then in practice, that gets delegated down to lower level employees in the department. Obviously, the Secretary has a lot of other things to be doing. So in practice, when we talk about the delegate, and when you talk to the CBD team and they're saying the delegate is going to be making a decision, or we're waiting on the delegate, or we need to give information to the delegate, what that means is that's the staff member in the department that's been delegated that authority to make decisions under the Act. And so every application that comes through the program, whether it's a building energy efficiency certificate, it's a lighting assessment, it's an exemption, or an assessor accreditation, all of those are decisions, legal decisions, that have to be made by somebody who's been delegated that authority. So there's multiple people in the department that can make that decision, and they're actually related to a role, not a specific person. So you can have different people come through different roles over time. But every application has to go through somebody delegated with that authority. So that's why you'll sometimes hear we're waiting on the delegate, or we need to ask questions for the delegate, because they're the ones that are making the decisions on your applications. The other part of that process is that the CBD team that you guys will be talking to on a regular basis, part of our job is to review the applications and try and preempt any questions that the delegate might have. And we would review the application, try and answer any questions, recommend it to be either approved or rejected, and then that goes to the delegate to make that final decision. So our job is to try and preempt the questions, which is why we might come back to you and ask more questions to try and hopefully answer everything before that application gets up to the delegate to make a decision. So the next section we'll talk about exemptions and exceptions. Sounds very similar, but very different things in terms of the CBD program. So an exemption, the first point is that to get an exemption, you need to make a formal application to the department to make a decision. There's 3 types that you can do. You can apply on the basis that the building is being used for police or national security purposes. And most of the time that means that you as the assessor is unable to access it because of security concerns. Next option is a major refurbishment. And then the third option is where a NABERS rating is not possible for the building. So in terms of police and security, what we're looking for normally with those is a letter or an email from the police or security tenant explaining that there's high security things going on and you can't enter. And that's basically all we need to process that one. For major refurbishments and NABERS rating not possible, those are a lot more complicated, potentially. For a major refurbishment, what we're normally looking for is evidence that the project is underway. And from a CBD perspective, that means the contracts have been signed and you're not in that planning stage. We're not really looking at whether works are happening on site or not. It's more about whether the contract's been signed. And whether the works that are going on are going to change the NABERS rating by half a star or more. So we're looking at changes to the energy using equipment in the building, and a lot of the time we're looking at whether there's changes to the air conditioning system, which is the major energy using stuff in an office building. The last one is where your NABERS rating is not possible. The first part for this is you need to confirm with NABERS that the issue that you found means the building is not rateable. And then you need to provide a full description of that to CBD, as well as evidence about why it's not rateable and what you've done to try and fix that issue. The NABERS rules have a lot of different options to try and have workarounds for minor missing data and that type of thing. And what we want to see normally is some effort to get around the problem, fix the issue, and if you can't, some understanding of what the process will be in the future to try and fix that problem. So a good example is having problems with gas meters, and maybe the meter has not been read properly, it's been estimated. That's a very common issue. So you get to do your rating, you look at the bills, you find 6 months of the gas meter is estimated. That's fine, but you need to provide all those bills to us as evidence. You can't just have a statement saying the gas meter's been estimated and that's it. You need to provide those bills, and then you also need to answer questions like, is there any manual meter reads you can use to rate the building? Is there sub-rating or anything on the side that you can be using to try and get that rating done? And then also what the plan will be in the future to make sure that you could do the rating next time. The last thing I'd say about that as well is that while you need to consult with NABERS for that type of exemption, NABERS does not approve the exemptions. They need to come through CBD. So it's a 2-part process. We need to see that interaction with the NABERS team so they agree that you can't rate the building. But then that final decision has to come through CBD, and the NABERS team will point you to CBD on that basis as well. So exceptions, a bit more complicated potentially, but basically this means that you're unaffected by the legislation in the CBD program in the first place. You're not disclosure affected. So the common one that we don't really talk about is where the building is not being offered for sale or lease. If you're not trying to sell the building, if you're not leasing space over 1,000 square meters, the BEEC Act does not apply. You don't have to do anything. And there's no requirement to get a rating or an exemption or anything. The other common one we see is mixed use buildings. And you can see the picture here where you've got a large warehouse and a sort of small office space attached to it. Where that's all part of the same building, if it's less than 75% office, then that building as a whole is not disclosure affected. And again, you don't have to do anything. Strata titled buildings or equivalent kind of ownership structures, those are not affected either. And the primary reason for that is that it would be very complicated to decide who is legally obligated to get a BEEC when you've got an ownership corporation with 50 different owners. And then the other category that comes up is new buildings or buildings that have had a major refurbishment where you've got a certificate of occupancy at the end of that process. Those buildings are unaffected for 2 years from the date of that certificate of occupancy. So that's new buildings less than 2 years old and major refurbishments where you've had a certificate of occupancy. So you don't need to apply for an exemption. It's automatic. You can talk to the CBD team and try and understand whether this applies, but in the end, it's a self-assessment for the building owner. But the compliance team may come across advertisements for that building and ask for some evidence about whether you think it's a exception or not. And for an example, with that warehouse, you might show that plan and say, look, there's this much office, this much warehouse, we think we're not affected. And so it's good to have that evidence on file in case you're asked, but you don't need to apply to the CBD program. So, tips for better assessments or how to get your BEEC approved quickly. The CBD team is always trying to do the applications as fast as possible, and in some circumstances we can try and prioritise them for you if needed. But in the end, if you can give us all the information we need, that's the best way to get your application moving through the process smoothly. So the first thing we could talk about is the different areas on the building energy efficiency certificate. So there's three. There's your net level area of the building, there's the NABERS rated area, and then there's the assessed NLA on the tenancy lighting assessment. And part of the review process that the team does is we look at those three areas to try and understand as a basic idea whether you've assessed the whole building and all the office space. When you are doing all office space TLA, part of our job is to make sure that you have actually assessed all the office bits in the building. And that's important. If the building's for sale, the BEEC and the lighting assessment that's included with that has to have all office space on there. So when we look at these different areas, if we see, for example, the NABERS rated area is larger than the TLA assessed NLA, we might ask why that is. Have you missed some spaces in the TLA? If the building NLA is larger than the TLA NLA, we'll ask the same question. Is there some spaces missing? What do we need to do? So it's important that when you're putting that information in, remember that when you're putting in the net lettable area of the building, that's just the office space we're looking at. We're not looking at retail or science laboratories or gyms or anything like that. It's just the office space that we're looking at. If there is something strange there, if you can explain that in the comments for your application, that will always help us. Otherwise, we'll have to ask the question, and that means a delay in the process. When you're doing your tenancy lighting assessment, there's a general assessment comments field, and this is your best friend in terms of trying to give us information that means we can progress your application quickly. So things we will look at when we look through the list of functional spaces, we'll try and find out if there's missing floors, if it looks like some floors have smaller areas compared to the other ones, is there missing bits of those? And if you can provide that information up front, for example, level 12 in my building is a plant floor, so that's not included, and the ground floor is half office and half retail, and the retail half's not included. That answering all those questions up front means we don't have to ask, and again, your application gets through quicker. So the important part here is that, again, if you have non-office spaces, so retail, warehouse, anything like that, they don't need to be included in your list of functional spaces. But if you do, you can put that comment in there to explain that you've done that so we understand. Last point I think with those is to make sure if you've got subdivided floors or floors with a lot of tenancies, to just double check before you submit that you've included every space on there. The other part of this is that we will ask when we have N or PD values in your application that are very high or very low. And this chart is just showing a distribution of functional spaces with those N or PD values. And so there's a percentage on the left, and then the N or PD sort of brackets down the bottom. So the portal will prompt you if you've got anything under 3.5, it will ask you to provide a bit more information. And then if there's anything under 2, the CBD team will also ask the question. If you haven't given any additional information, they'll ask a question about what's happening in that space, because that's extremely low. If it's over 25, again, we'll ask you the question if you haven't given an explanation. But you can see in this distribution that over 25 and below 2 are very, very small parts of our overall spread. So they're very rare, so that's why I would ask that question. So if you could pre-answer that, if your space has no lighting in the ceiling and it just has task lighting, or it has very little lighting in the ceiling, maybe the NLPD is very low, you can provide that information and that ticks the box for us. So tips for better TLAs. I think hopefully most of this is fairly basic for people watching, but it's good to try and print off all your information and review it before you go to site. And if you can, try and mark out non-office spaces and non-accessible spaces before you get there, so you don't have to look at them and you can move through quickly. Most of you will probably have your own checklist that you've made up, but there is a checklist in the TLA rules you can use as well to do your application on site. And I think the other part of this is to make sure you take your laser measurer and your ballast discriminator so you can measure up spaces and check lights if you need to. When you're on site, use the checklist. You have to be methodical, make sure you've ticked everything off as you're going through. Review your plans as you go. Hopefully you've been provided some sort of plans before you go, and review those and make notes where things are different and see if you can get newer plans or you have to mark up your own. Make detailed site notes. The more information you can collect, the better, obviously. And remember that you may get audited and you need to keep this for 7 years. So in 7 years' time, you're not going to remember what you did on the site. You need to have those detailed notes there to back that up. And the last part is, if you can, to index your photos or have some sort of system so you can easily understand what space is going with which photo. And lastly, tips for tricky buildings. So that building there's looks a bit rough. I guess another way of saying this would be tips for older buildings where you maybe don't have that information. So be prepared to sketch up floor plans if you don't have anything. Be prepared to try and find spare lamps, lamp fittings, anything you can find to try and help you work out what's actually installed. Again, make sure you index your photos. Remember that it's not your job to get up on top of tables or chairs and open light fittings, and you shouldn't be doing that. You should be trying to get an electrician or a site contact to help you with that stuff. And if you can't figure out what's in the in the lighting system safely, then there's default options in the rules that you can use. The last point is that you can actually call our team. If you're on site and you're having some issue and you're not sure what the right approach is, you can call us and we'll help you in real time and try and make sure you can get the information you need. And that's a really good idea. It's much better to do that than to wait until there's a problem later on or you get audited. So now I'll hand over to Steve to go through the compliance section.
Thanks, Ross. Excuse me. I'll just run through what the CBD compliance team does. So basically, CBD compliance team is ensuring compliance with the BEEC Act. So we do this by assisting the regulated entities to understand the requirements of the Act through our monitoring, our education and engagement. And basically the role is to return stakeholders to voluntary compliance so that we run through what they need and make sure that they return to it voluntarily rather than us enforcing or infringing. Main sections for this are the section 11. So there's no sale or lease or sublease without a BEEC. So you have to have the BEEC in place before you place any advertising or offering out into the market. Even if you're doing a private LOI, it still applies. It's not something where it just goes public. We're also looking at section 15, where the advertisements have to include the energy efficiency ratings and have to be similar size to all the other information that's on the actual advertising as well. So we run through those. We do this by monitoring and engaging with all the stakeholders and regulated entities. So a lot of online advertisements through third-party websites or through direct websites for agencies or building owners. So we check all of these different online areas. And once we collate the information, we get in contact with the building owner and go from there. Field surveillance is carried out on buildings across Australia. So we have both federal and state inspectors who are out in the streets where we would find buildings of 1,000 square metres or more, and they will be looking to ensure that that stakeholders and regulated entities comply with Section 15 with their advertising on the building. We do get confidential tip-offs. We take them and we work with what's presented. The information is provided and is kept confidential. If you do provide a tip-off, you won't be involved in the rest of the case. You won't know what the result is, and your information, if you don't do it anonymously, is not given out to anybody. It's just recorded there for our records. So if you're not feeling confident to tip something off, thinking that you get called up to represent what you found in court, that's not the case. You provide a tip-off, we will take that information, we will go through our standard process, and then whether it turns into a case or not will depend on what we find from there. There's numerous other types of things that we monitor, so videos, newspapers, social media. So if agents say they've just sold a building on LinkedIn, and it's a great sale and so forth, we would check that and see whether or not it had a BEEC, because it's, if it meets the criteria for CBD, we would then be in contact with the person. Example of a sign with the NABERS rating, energy rating clearly written in the middle there, same size as all the other wording. It does have to say NABERS energy rating, not just NABERS rating. NABERS does numerous ratings, so we need to know that it is that NABERS energy rating without green power, of course. And you can have all your other ratings underneath that if you wish to. There's nothing stopping you, but for our CBD program legislation, we need to have that NABERS energy rating somewhere on the sign, and then all the others can follow straight after that. I'll just run through some feedback from our auditors. So we do a level 2 audit, and it's about 5–10% of the TLAs that are submitted throughout a year or financial year. And we basically, similar to NABERS, take the evidence that's provided by the assessors, give it to an auditor, and ensure that the rules have been properly applied and the assessment methods and the standards determined under Section 21 of the Act. So it is, if you're a NABERS assessor, it'll be a similar thing with the CBD. We will basically contact you, acknowledge that you've been selected for a level 2 audit, and then you'll be contacted again to submit your evidence, and then you will receive a report with feedback and a result on that audit as well. We're also managing conflicts of interest. It's very critical to us to make sure that it is correct and all the information is there. So if there is a conflict of interest, please bring it up as soon as possible. Just quickly, some stats. I won't run through all the figures here. There's basically a large number that have passed with no or minor issues. Some have failed with moderate issues, and it's good to see that the failed with major issues is a rather low number, but we're trying to ensure that we can try and improve that number and improve the pass percentage a lot more. So we'll be working with the assessors every time they come through the audit process. Some potential outcomes for a failed result, address errors. So if you get a failed result, we address the errors and we resubmit the TLA for certification. So basically we work through with you what has happened. You have a chance to agree or disagree with what the auditor may come back with, and then we rectify that situation, and if a new TLA is required, a new TLA is submitted. If it affects the BEEC or if an exemption, for instance, we have to notify the building owner of the change. So if it changes any of the NLPD scores, we will notify the building. If something during a level 2 audit, during the fail, sort of looks towards sort of fraudulent activity or something, it'll be escalated to a level 3 on-site audit, where an auditor will visit the building that you've done and redo the audit for us. Future, and then consequences are future TLAs will be performed under the supervision of an auditor. The assessor may have to take more training to remain, well, even also remaining accredited, and also fraudulent activity will be investigated further. There's sort of various feedback from auditors on the slide there for you. I won't run through each individual one just now. But it gives you an idea of the issues that we face and the percentages of those issues and so forth. So at the end, if there's more questions in regards to that, happy to go through it. And also you can contact us if there's any more questions in regards to those sort of issues that come through there. What's next? We're continuing to improve the CBD system. So for both the program team and the compliance team, there's lots more work to be done, so bear with us whilst we keep continually improving it, listening to your feedback and then putting out more. Now that COVID has sort of come to a point where we can get back out and engage with the stakeholders, compliance officers will be out in the field a lot more. We're increasing this and we're hoping to sit down and engage with as many stakeholders as possible, both assessors and agents. Streamlining the audit process, so hopefully in the future we'll be using the portal for both the assessors and the auditors to save a lot of information being sent backwards and forwards through other means. And that all the feedback and the results collated and considered for future rules will be collected and considered and put into place. So we'll go through that. We're also updating the CBD training so that it's a self-service type training, just like NABERS. And that's coming into the future as well. So look out for that one. And quickly, lastly, we are here to help. So ongoing feedback is always welcome. If there's an issue or anything you want to raise, please bring it up. Please let us know. We provide audit summaries to the assessors so that they can see what they've done and keep improving their audits to keep improving their results. We do send guidance out, so there's guidance sent out in 2021. That will continue as well. And yeah, so you'll have plenty of information coming your way, and it's just a matter of trying to use that at every chance that you get. Finally, you can contact either team, compliance through the compliance@cbd.gov.au or the program team through the info@cbd.gov.au to talk to us. Thank you. Thank you, Russ.
All right, so we'll go through some questions and answers now, and you can still put your questions through in the chat, I think, as we're still going. So first one we had was, when's the next CBD Assessor training? We've got new employees that want to become CBD accredited. So that is actually on Friday. This Friday we've got a webinar running for the CBD training. You can sign up for that on the NABERS training page. It's all done through the NABERS portal. And after that, we're working right now on updating our training package to be self-service online, similar to all the other NABERS training modules that are on there. So in the future, we won't be running those webinars, but you'll be able to sign up, do the training package, do your exam, become accredited in your own time. So that'll be good. Next one I think is for Steve. What happens to me or my client if compliance discovers a breach of CBD requirements?
Okay, so if we discover through our monitoring or through information that we're provided, we basically collect evidence as to what has been found, and we look at various platforms, various areas to collect as much information as possible. The client or the agency, whoever's the information that we found, will be contacted, explaining what CBD is, what we feel is the potential non-compliance of what we found, and then giving the client an opportunity or the stakeholder an opportunity to respond to that. So the advertisement may be wrong and it's saying that it's offering so much, but in fact it's doing something else, and that'll be confirmed to us in writing by the relevant stakeholder. Otherwise, if it is non-compliant, we give the clients opportunities to return to voluntary compliance. So they remove the advertising, contact an assessor, get their applications done, get their ratings done. Once they're certified and a BEEC is in place, they can then recommence the offering and go back to advertising and so forth. Now, that is the ideal situation. That's what we work for, and it works a lot of the time. On a few cases where that doesn't happen and the owner and that just refuses to comply, return to voluntary compliance, or the sale proceeds and is completed, the CBD compliance team will work with the enforcement manager in our section, and that will go through a process of presenting them a referral where that would go to either sort of warning letters, enforcing them to sort of return to that voluntary compliance again, and then that engagement will continue onwards. But if it gets to a point where even that doesn't work, the enforcement action is then considered and proceeded with, and the client could receive an infringement notice ranging from $22,000 for the first day or $222,000 for the first day. So that it is a big sum for not sort of complying with the Act.
All right. Next one we've got from Diana. She asks, is the program looking to expand to other sectors this year? So as everybody will be aware, there's a new government that's just come in recently, and the direction of that is sort of still being sorted out in terms of what the program will look like in the future. So at this stage, it's basically a wait and see what the new government is going to be doing in this space. There was the CBD review was completed in 2019, and you can read that. That's on our website, and that talks about expansion to other areas and how that might work. But at the moment, yeah, it's a bit of a wait and see on that front. This next one I think might be for Steve. From Anonymous. What happens if I get audited once I've changed companies and can't access the information anymore?
Yep. So we've selected you for an audit. If you're not in that company anymore and for some reason you haven't kept the evidence with you, so it is up to the assessors to maintain all the copies of their own evidence for a period of 7 years. You may not be audited straight away. You could be audited 3 to 4 years after you've done an application. So it is important for the assessors to do that. But if you have moved companies, we do work with the company that you're employed with at that time. If that does work and that evidence can be generated or given to you to process to us, we would then proceed with the audit. If it doesn't and we can't get the evidence in from either of you, but we basically have to go back to the building owner and respond to them to say that we cannot confirm that application because of the level 2, it's a failure. So that's sort of not where you want to head. You want to be able to make sure that you keep that evidence handy, and even if you move companies, it should come with you, or a copy of it should come with you to provide to the auditors once it's requested from you. So yes, if we cannot gain that evidence and confirm that assessment, basically we start going back to the building owner, and then if they can't provide that either after that point, the TLA will have to be revoked and a new one have to be issued, and the BEEC as well. So it's a process that we don't want to go to. We want to be able to just audit it and check your work, but yeah, that's the worst case scenario, is that if we don't get everything, a new BEEC, a new TLA and a new BEEC will have to be provided and assessed.
At the building owner's expense?
Again, well, yes, yeah. So, and as an assessor, you don't really want clients sort of, asking, why do I have to do something again when I already paid for it before? So ideally, yes, if you're in a company, make sure that you do have access to your evidence. You are required to keep it for 7 years, and you might get audited in year 3 or 4 after the TLA was done.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, but I think I know our assessor community moves around a fair bit in between the different sort of companies that work in this space. So it is just something to think about if you're moving companies, to probably have that conversation and say, what's the process going to be if I get audited in 5 years? Can I come back and collect the data? Can I take it with me now? Just have a think about it before you leave is probably a good plan. Or
even when you commence a new position. So you're joining with a company and just, your contract or whatever it may be, and just say, this evidence is required to be kept by me. Do I have access to it at all times? So yeah, even at the beginning, before it comes to the end, have that discussion.
Yeah. So the next question we've got is, I've got a 5-year TLA that's expiring in a few weeks. Can I still get a BEEC that's valid for 12 months? The short answer is no. Your BEEC expires when either the NABERS rating or the TLA expires. So the BEEC can only ever last for a maximum of 12 months. Most of the time it's limited by the NABERS rating, which expires in 12 months or less. Because we've got a lot of our TLAs in that first batch of 5-year TLAs that started in 2016, 2017 are coming to their expiring now. It's quite common that we have BEECs coming through that are fairly short in their validity period. So if your TLA is expiring in a couple of weeks, your BEEC will only last for a couple of weeks. And you'll need to start that process to get a new TLA. So that's important to check when you're going to these buildings, to look up the TLA, and you can see that on the whatever the last BEEC was for that building, or you can contact us and ask, and just see if it's going to be expiring soon, and talk with your client about getting a new one sorted out. Otherwise, you might have to answer the question about why their BEEC is only lasting a couple of weeks.
And you also don't want to rush that application to get that other next TLA, because if you rush an application, you might miss something, and then if you're audited and you're missing information and so forth, again, it could end in a failure as well. So
Chandana's got a question. What was the oldest level 2 audit done from the completion year?
The oldest level 2 audit from the completion year?
I think he means, what's the oldest? Have we done any at 7 years?
Not at 7 years, probably 3 to 4 years. So what will happen is, if you fail an audit and we suspect something is happening there, we may go back and look at previous audits to see if there's a chain of events or something happening. So I dare say 3 to 4 years, but we do want you to keep it for the 7 years to sort of ensure that if we do need that information, it is there. It can also be, an assessor has done one at this time, and previously when they were done every 12 months, we had changeover assessors, so sometimes the results are a little bit different, and we would go back and have a look at a previous TLA and audit it to see why there is a slight difference, whether the lighting's been upgraded and it's just not marked correctly, or there was an error in the original one or something like that. So it can go back 3 or 4 years was the sort of one, but that was a chain of events that were happening in relation to a particular TLA or a particular building.
Yeah. All right. Another one, which I think is probably for both of us. What happens to a BEEC when its NABERS rating changes after a level 2 audit? And I think that applies for a TLA as well. If the TLA results change, if the NLPD or the controls assessment changes after a level 2 audit, it's the same process either way. The building owner's notified of that.
Yep.
And basically, if there's a BEEC associated with those, that BEEC is then cancelled because it's invalid. And we would look to the assessor to resubmit either a new TLA if the TLA was incorrect, or with the NABERS rating, part of the rating, the audit process for NABERS is you'll normally get a revised rating immediately with the outcome of that process if it's changes. And we would ask the assessor to resubmit a BEEC application using the same NABERS rating, same TLA. And when that comes through our system, we'll pick up the updated NABERS rating and we'll reissue that. And then we'll notify the owner that they need to change their advertisements that they've got. So if the NABERS rating changes, obviously they need to change all advertising that references that, which can, obviously sometimes be a fairly big job. And we'll give them a letter to basically outline that process. And, if there's an incorrect NABERS rating on your advertising, that's a breach of the Act, and the compliance team will probably get involved with that. So it is a big inconvenience for you and for the owner, but we try and help with that process and get it sorted as quickly as possible and get the correct information out to the market.
And can I just say that if you do fail a NABERS audit or it needs to be changed, there's a high likelihood that you'll be audited for the TLA for the same building as well. So It's just a check that we do to make sure that what's happened there hasn't happened with the TLA. So just, yeah, it's something to sort of be aware of, that it's not you're being picked on because of that. It's purely we're just doing a double check because it affects the certificate, the BEEC at the end. So yeah, that's one of the markers for a selection for a TLA, for an audit, sorry.
Yep. All right, this one's for you, Steve. How many infringements have CBD Compliance issued this year?
Oh, the tricky question, no. So CBD has issued several infringement notices since implementation. There's been a very large amount of warning letters issued as well to different stakeholders, be it the building owners and their agents. We don't sort of work on a high number of infringement notices. Our legislation states that if somebody is infringed twice in a 12-month period, they appear on a non-disclosure register on the CBD website. Currently, there is nobody on that register. We haven't had the same person or the same sort of stakeholders be infringed twice in one 12-month period. Yeah, it's basically that. But what we've worked on is a high rate of voluntary compliance, which has allowed us to sort of minimise the number of infringements that we go there. So that engagement, that education, as much as possible, has kept our non-compliance to a very low level, and we found that in the second half of since the program was implemented in the last 5, 6, 7 years, we've had much greater results with that engagement education, and it hasn't lent us to sort of go to a full infringement process. So we've kept that to a minimum through that engagement.
Yeah. All right, I think our time's almost up. We'll finish up now. Thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you. Steve. Thanks, Ross.
We're going to go have a short break now, and then we'll head to the wrap-up panel. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.